With gaming trends moving more and more towards a massive open-world format, RPGs are forced to navigate a fine line between their traditional linear narrative structure and modern giant sandbox game design philosophy. It can be argued that open world has brought many more people to the genre. See Bethesda's Elder Scrolls and Fallout series. Also, open world games such as Grand Theft Auto have brought people to gaming in the first place. Final Fantasy XV is the classic RPG series' first stab at this modern design philosophy, which successfully brought on board a new generation of players to the series. Xenoblade Chronicles X was another JRPG brand that took a big leap into the open world format, nearly abandoning its narrative for a complete free-roam gameplay experience. CD Projekt Red's hit, The Witcher 3, is held by many to be the gold standard of the new way in open-world RPG experiences. While I don't consider it a full RPG, The Legend of Zelda: The Breath of the Wild is another series with a long legacy jumping into the open-world fold. The point is, the trend is real, and there's not many signs of it stopping. But does a trend equal the best format to present their optimal RPG experience? That's the question we look to answer today. Most of this topic is truly subjective. What do you look for, and what do you get out of games? What combination of elements truly gets your fancy glands churning? Do you stick around for the story, or do you just enjoy the playground gameplay experience? I do have my own personal opinions, but I will do my best to objectively quantify things as best possible. As a player who grew up playing classic JRPGs, it's pretty ingrained in my mind that narrative should be priority. It should be the front and center element to a game. The core mission, from my perspective, is how do you present this narrative in a well-paced manner that doesn't interrupt or conflict with the flow of gameplay. Game design in an open-world setting are becoming commonplace. From side quests to exploration, these are now guarantees of game expectations. So how do you have an urgent plot that can coincide with these mechanics? The Witcher makes sense. A mercenary is simply doing his job with no sense of urgency, besides the long-standing quest of finding his wife. Final Fantasy XV does not make as much sense. The basic plot is, as a royal heir, your city and father have been destroyed and you must get to Altissia to find and marry your bride-to-be, Lunafreya. This urgency does not give credence to wandering around, collecting items, and doing many irrelevant side quests. These elements are where the JRPG format clashes with Western open-world design philosophy. You can always say it's just a game, but some franchises try to go above and beyond just a game in order to tell a larger-than-life story. It's this ambition that clashes with modern game design philosophy. While I do see future modern Final Fantasy installments as being antithetical to their previous, Final Fantasy goes big and bold with their new direction, for better or for worse. You can see over the past decade the slow ebb towards open-world design. Final Fantasy XIII's linearity was met with mixed reception and slowly opened up, with 13.2's time travel structure and Lightning Returns near open-world design. 15 took the series to new open-world heights. Final Fantasy has a huge fan base with a wide array of expectations. One of my favorite parts about the series is how each installment feels unique from the previous, almost as if each installment is a new IP in itself. Final Fantasy XII is vastly different from Final Fantasy VII, as Final Fantasy IX is very different from Final Fantasy XV. From recent fan surveys and the general buzz in the community, I have concluded that there is one element of Final Fantasy that fans across the board want to be floored by. It's not the open world, it's not an action or turn-based battle system necessarily. Fans want to be immersed by Square's lifelong reputation of telling a solid story with compelling characters. Now, which of these formats is best in service to telling a story? Whether you liked it or not, you have to admit that 13 put its story front and center. The narrative kept on moving forward and was put into hyper-focus. This is best served by a linear structure. Yes, 13 is by far the most linear of the series. Before you say, hey Thomas, what about 10? Well yes, 10 was quite a linear experience as well. probably the most after 13, but 10 gave you plenty to do on the side with regards to gameplay, such as the Cloister of Trials, Blitzball, side quests, minigames, monster hunting, you get it, hopefully. But this is all besides the point. 13 was able to present its story above all else due to this structure. Now, whether you liked it or not is up for debate, but the linear design does prop up a storytelling rhythm and pace that cannot be maintained in an open world format. There are certainly some moments in the story that gives rationale to explore and waste time, but that must be made clear. In 15, you can veer off the main path for hours before you hit another story beat. Don't get me wrong, I love the game, but I noticed at some points that the story presence was pretty lacking, a feeling I had not felt since the middle section of Final Fantasy XII. I was one of the weirdos who liked Final Fantasy XV when it became linear towards the home stretch, mostly because it felt more like a familiar Final Fantasy game to me that prioritized narrative. Now, if you're going to get into the series primarily for gameplay, then yes, you probably weren't bothered by the lack of story. But what always attracted me to the franchise were the characters, the story, the lore. And all of this gave context for these gorgeous worlds laid out before us. This is where a lot of the magic happens in the series. It's very noticeable to me when the story is at a point where it has no presence. On the other hand, the monotony of Final Fantasy XIII's linear game design was almost another immersion breaker for me. I do consider myself a fan of 13. I was able to appreciate the aesthetics, the battle system, story, and its world. I still consider it to this day to be the most polished Final Fantasy of the modern era, but I struggle to defend its linear design structure. But on the other hand, I was not dissatisfied with the storytelling. I was happy and excited the entire time with regards to the story. Even though not perfect, I never felt disconnected from the narrative. I can't say the same for Final Fantasy XV and Final Fantasy XII to a near similar degree. This sense of illusion and pacing is what really makes the storytelling and gaming palatable and accessible. In the PlayStation 1 era of Final Fantasy, the games are actually remarkably linear, but the developers always make sure you have something to do on the side or keep pushing you through to new and interesting levels. Take Final Fantasy VII for example. The opening Midgar segment is revered around the world, but it's actually remarkably linear and very narrative focused. What makes it palatable from a gameplay perspective is how things keep changing. The ride keeps on going, it stays fresh. The game is very successful at combining gameplay and narrative that they support each other. There are areas like Sector 7 or Wall Market where you get a break from battle and get to explore and essentially world build by interacting with the environments. Even the world maps in classic Final Fantasy games are quite linear. You do usually get to go off the path for a side dungeon or optional town, which is just enough to keep things fresh and never long enough to detract from the story. In fact, these areas can be assets to the storytelling, and you might learn more details about a certain plot point that are missing from the main path. While mediums and expectations have changed dramatically since the 1990s, I hope that developers can look back and adapt that similar format to 2017 game development standards, particularly for RPGs. Persona 5 is proof that the classic formula can still succeed in the modern era. It followed a very linear, narrative-driven structure. I was honestly surprised as to why mainstream critics were very welcoming to this title, especially after panning many, in my opinion, well-made RPGs in the past that followed a very similar formula. It was encouraging to see such a positive reaction for game mechanics that were mainstream during the turn of the millennium. I hope that future developers will see the merit in following what your creative heart desires versus having to cater and thereby water down to mainstream gaming conventions. But sadly, that's the nature of the beast these days. AAA products, with a lot of money invested in them, have management more and more involved than ever, want to create as much mass appeal in order to sell their product and turn a profit. So what's the answer to these clashing modes and methods, especially for Final Fantasy and other AAA narrative-driven RPG games? I'd like to present some examples of a hybrid philosophy. These titles attempt to combine the best qualities of open world and linear design. Here, I hope is a direction that the industry can follow and aim to deliver this balance between a narrative experience and freedom in gameplay. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Nier Automata are two recent games that attempt this philosophy, a healthy medium that I find a lot to be optimistic about. These games balance large hubs with linear paths in between. You're welcome to explore a large new open area, but you never get too far away or off the beaten path from continuing the story. In Nier, you are given a hub nearly from the beginning of the game, and you simply navigate around the hub to discover new areas. Nier is a strange game, and that's a large bit of its appeal, but I really liked how it balanced its narrative and gameplay. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 places you on a series of titans that each have their own unique environments. These places give the illusion of being large and open, but just sizable enough to where you don't veer off from the narrative too much. It lowers the risk of losing storytelling rhythm and allows the creators to give the player a sense of pacing. I'm still playing through Xenoblade 2 as we speak, and I have enjoyed how the environments are kept fresh and they keep coming at a rather quick pace. The pacing reminds me of 90s RPGs where you keep getting introduced to new places rather quickly and gives the player a healthy balance between gameplay and storytelling. Granted, I'm only about 15 hours into this very long experience, but I've noticed and appreciated the fine balance the game has struck. More and more developers can make worlds gigantic, but with regards to telling a story with intuitive gameplay mechanics, it's best to not let the player veer off too far from the narrative, or it will simply lose its weight. Before I get super flamed by y'all, I want to offer Final Fantasy XIII as having the right layout for a modern RPG. Granted, the linear sections have huge missteps, but it does serve the narrative. Yes, there should have been many more distractions and veering paths during the linear sections, and frankly some areas should have been much shorter, but it did prioritize the narrative. It served setting up the narrative rather well. I appreciated that by the time it opens up, you're very immersed in the plot and story. I do think RPGs should have a break from its narrative from time to time in order to maintain flow and pacing. I look at the Calm Lands in Final Fantasy X and Grand Pulse in Final Fantasy XIII as being pretty good moments that open up the gameplay that are also supported by that point in the story. In 13, the group has recently fled Grand Pulse to find out the truth behind their focus. They are no longer being pursued in Cocoon, so it makes sense for the group to explore and to wind things down a little bit. In 10, we just escaped the events of Bavel and learned some hard truths about Yevon and their true motives. It's a good moment to pump the brakes in the story and give the player time to reflect while exploring the Calm Lands. Linearity has been a bad word in the modern gaming world, but if implemented correctly, it can actually be much of a service to the gameplay flow and narrative delivery. Open world is certainly in vogue right now, and it has great elements of exploration and allows the player to play the game on their own terms. I'm sure the pendulum will eventually swing back, but games risk becoming vanilla and repetitive as they all adopt open world tropes. I hope that elements can be combined with both formats, and you can in fact have both a linear and open world hybrid that delivers the best of both worlds. In summary, open world can damage the experience of presenting a narrative, and linear games can damage a gameplay experience. I hope that RPG developers are able to resist the full open world trend and help find more of a balance between the two. Look to the past about what made the genre so popular. It was the fine balance between linearity and freedom that created a sense of freshness and desire to keep playing. As the evolution of technology continues and allows for more tools and design, so should storytelling as well. It will be interesting to see what design ideas come from many great titles on the horizon. It is my hope that developers can find this fine balance between telling a story and delivering a satisfying gameplay experience. thanks for tuning in, guys. Appreciate it. There will be more videos ahead. Please subscribe, please comment, and enjoy the day. Thanks.